Prasher to come. Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. You've actually really scanned the kind of waterfront. I too would like to begin, first of all, by thanking the organisers for this evening, because I think it's been a very thoughtful subject, and it's good that we are celebrating the International Women's Day by organising this function at the Nehru Centre. I think, as you've already heard, that the International Women's Day is something which has been celebrated since the 1900s. And I value such days because I think they do three things for me. One, I think it's an opportunity to celebrate, because we can reflect back and see what progress has been made. And I think it's a day for reflection, it's a day for celebration. But I think it's also an opportunity, after we reflected, to resolve to see what more needs to happen. So I think it's good that such concentrated attention is being paid, because you would have heard on the radio 4 this morning that the Women's Day is being celebrated all over the world in different ways. And I think it's interesting how it actually connects women by spirit, in the sense that no matter what your cultural background, whatever your status, you come together as women. And I think from their point of view, it's a very important thing. And I must say, I also enjoyed the introduction by Kranti. When she talked about women are like water, I was reminded of another saying I heard, very British in context: women are like a tea bag. The hotter the water, the stronger they become. and I just couldn't resist but to tell you that. Now, I think what I want to do is not go into what I call the socio-economic reasons. I want to actually offer some personal reflections, which are drawn from my personal experience of what I think the issues are. But one thing I'm encouraged by, I think, because I have worked in the issues to do with disadvantage on grounds of race, disability, minorities, I think there's always a danger that groups come together and they can develop what I call a victim mentality. You can sit around, moan and groan and say everything is wrong, and then you think you've achieved something. And I think what I'm encouraged by when I meet women in this country, the Asian women in particular, we haven't developed a victim mentality. We've actually got up and done things. And I think that's a very good start. You know, there is a great spirit in terms of wanting to overcome obstacles. So I think from that point of view, we are onto a good start, because I'm a person who always thinks the glass is half full. It's never half empty. So I think it's important at starting out that we have this very positive attitude and that we haven't developed a victim mentality. Now, looking at issues to do with alienation and identity, I think I want to put it in a very broader context, because not just women, but all of us, I think, are living in changing times. Because I think we all say, yes, you know, life is changing, but I think every time has its significant features of change. And I think the change that we are facing is phenomenally fast. And I think we're living in a time when, you know, the socio-cultural mores and values are evolving and changing. And I think there are challenges of migration. People are actually moving. And it is, one may call, is an age of alienation and identity crisis for everyone. Because in a way, you know, there is so much movement that everybody's grouping. You don't have to look far to say even whether the United Kingdom will remain together. You know, and there's a whole question of English identity, Scottish identity. So we're living through an age where there is the whole issue of crisis of identity. And I think this is in some ways more complex for men, for women, sorry, because women today are intensely aware of their societal position, their position in the family. They are caught in what I call tradition and modernity. And of course, those of us who've migrated, the challenges, you know, which migration brings, you know, which Nirmala actually touched upon. And I think we are therefore in the process of redefining ourselves. What is our place in society and within our families? And I think, you know, it was double challenges, you know, place in society, place in family. And a society, if you've actually migrated, you know, there are pressures which actually Nirmala touched upon. And of course, it's not a simple situation, it's a very complex situation, a situation which is compounded by discrimination, suffocation, which can be suffered by some families, by some women within their families, within their marriages. Then there are cross-cultural issues, the dislocation because of migration, issues with assimilation, integration. And then, of course, there are broader things to do with identity, which is entangled with who we are, as daughters, as wives, mothers, sisters, grandmothers, employers, entrepreneurs. There are different roles that we play. So it's a very complex picture. I think all the more remarkable that we see in this country such dynamic women, achieving in all walks of life. And I think to me that's a real source of inspiration. And over the years, of course, in this country, we've seen a whole range of things that have been done to deal with issues to do with discrimination against women. We've had legislation. There has been all sorts of initiatives to deal with women, who may suffer all kinds of oppressions and so on. But I think for me, the thing that I will pull out, and I was very pleased that Nirmala used the word, is self-esteem. Because I think, yes, all these things are needed. Because to me, the most fundamental thing that we are groping for is self-esteem. Because if you don't have self-esteem, you don't have very much. And I see this not just in terms of women achievement, but I see now you mentioned that I was involved in literacy, and children who can't read, self-esteem is low. There are connections there. And I think we don't often spend enough time thinking about issues of self-esteem. And I think what we need to do, if we want to cope with this process of change, because we're all going through it, is how do we develop an honest ability to praise oneself? Because as I said, our identity is something which has been imposed upon us, as a daughter, a sister, mother, whatever. The thing really we need to know is, who are we? What tools do we need to be able to find out who we really are? And then to kind of emerge as us as individuals, as people in our own right. And I think, to me, that will be what I think we should resolve to do. Because, as I said, International Women's Day for celebration, for reflection. And when I'm reflecting what to say, I thought to myself, my reflection tells me that my resolve is, how do we actually get the tools to be able to build on our self-esteem and our identity? And that, to me, would be the message that we want to leave with you, is that we help each other to establish our identity and emerge from the pits of darkness, because in a way, that is what we're actually groping with. And I think in that context, I want to draw your attention to one of my favorite books, because in a way, I think, I could tell you a whole range of reflections how I got to where I did. I thought to myself, what is it that to me reflected what I identify with? And I think it's a book which I read some years ago. It's called Lost in Translation. It's a book by a Polish girl, Eva Hoffman, who emigrated from Poland to Canada. And I think it's a remarkable book and a story of her experiences as an emigre who loses and remakes her identity in a new land and translates her sense of self into a new identity, and in terms of even identity as a person, but even the way she masters the actual language. And I think this book kind of gives me hope, because the process of change and groping for identity need not necessarily be a negative thing, because groping for identity actually brings creativity. Because if you look at authors around the world, best writings are done by those who are actually struggling, because these are the things. And if you look at some of our Asian women writers, who are emigrated, to here or to West, that is what they're talking about. So I think it's actually a creative thing. So we should be looking at it as a positive thing. And I think it says, the journey is hard, but we need to kind of make it a creative thing. And in that process, I think, we need to identify who are the people who will help us? And I was again struck by what Nirmala said. Of course, sisterhood is important, but they don't really have to be women. Because the people who helped you were men. And if I may say so, Ken Young was someone I admired, and I worked with him. What an inspiration he was. Through your journey, there are people who kind of support you, and they're the people who actually help you see that. Therefore, I think the ability to identify who's going to support you is actually very, very important. And what I do want to, in fact, I wanted to read to you, because I went on the internet to see whether this book has been read and what other people have actually said. And I just want to read to you 2 or 3 comments made by women from very different countries who migrated, having read this book, Lost in Translation, what they actually said. The first one, it says, translation of the title is used in both its meanings. Eva Hoffman tells the story of her family's move from Poland to Canada in the late 1950s. The book's multi-layered narrative deals with childhood, parting, and identity. What happens to language when a person changes country? The author vividly describes the loss of language from everyday words, the ability to hold an audience of friends with a story. An outgoing, garrulous person is reduced to a monosyllabic watcher. And that's what happens when you can't speak the language. You see how alienated you can feel. It is not only language that changes, but also the cultural references and markings. She says, and I quote, because I don't know the background, I don't always grasp the foreground. So you can see the way she actually describes that. And 2 other very moving comments made by people who had read the book said, I just finished Lost in Translation, and I'm still lost in the pages of the book, in the painful acknowledgement of the reality it describes. We are all incompleted. Some of us because we have left behind a whole world of friends, of human interactions, of wisdom, and some others have never parted, and that don't know the power of unrootedness. It is a good book, as we keep forever in the back of our soul. And there's a second one, which I think is really moving. In Exile, Eva Hoffman says, but America is the land of yearning, and perhaps nowhere else are one's desires so wantonly stimulated. It is difficult to agree to being just one person. She vows to find a spiritual individualism through deprivation. Spiritualism through deprivation. This means something to me. It draws a feeling of incompleteness, regret for all the envy and wanting. Finding one's humanity and self is the ultimate test for survival in the new world. Now, I thought that was really very good. So I want to leave you on a very positive note. These are the issues, and therefore I think we have to look at this process of alienation identity, something creative, but at the same time I think we've got to recognize that this is not something we can do on our own, and therefore we want to find props, help each other to actually do that, to be able to recognize that. And I want to end on a positive note. I am very optimistic because I think the Asian women in this country have that resourcefulness, and we can actually do something very positive. So happy Holi and a happy International Women's Day.